Tonight, on the big story, an expose by the Standard about operational ills going on at the much-hyped Madaraka train service have left many Kenyans in shock. Now, stories of Kenyan workers being treated like slaves and being denied knowledge transfers by the Chinese, who have since 2016 been operating the SGR trains. KTN News reached out to some workers at the SGR, and they corroborated the shocking story. According to the people we spoke to, the disparity between Kenyan and Chinese workers at the SGR is just too apparent. Kenyan workers are not only denied equal pay, but are also subjected to punishment for asking pertinent work-related questions. This is against the backdrop of a 30 million shillings bill that the government pays China Road and Bridges Company to run the SGR every day, totaling to 1 billion shillings every month. This is the big story tonight. Wednesday, the 9th day of July 2018. A very good evening and welcome to the program. My name is Yusuf Ibrahim. Tonight I shall be speaking to John Chumo. He's the Secretary General of Kenya Railway Workers Union, as well as Reinhard Bonke. He's the Programs Officer at the Friends for Nairobi National Park. The Deputy Chair of the National Assembly Committee on Transport, Moses Kuria, will also speak to the program by way of phone shortly. But before we hear from them, let me bring in our lead reporter, Sophia Onuna, who is speaking to one of the fierce critics of the SGR project, economist Ndii.
Tonight, our focus on the SGR, one that the government, the Uhuru Kenyatta-led government, prides itself in. Over 400 billion shillings so far going into that first phase as they prepare for the second phase. However, as the government continues to tout this as the game changer for the country, there are those who are not convinced. And one such man is economist David Ndii, who since 2014 said this project, this huge infrastructural project, is simply not viable. It does not add up in as far as returns, and it having the impact that the government says it would want it to have. And he joins me now to have that conversation because we keep hearing there are more cargoes now, there are more trains, more people are being ferried back and forth, that SGR is working for what the intended purpose was. But you don't buy that, do you?
Thank you much, Sophia. We appraise or we evaluate investment development projects on 4 criteria. 1 is financial, whether it will make money. 2, economic, whether its economic benefits will exceed its costs. 3, social. Social means whether it promotes equity most of the time, but there are other factors as well. And 4, most important actually, is environmental. Is it sustainable? I looked at this project casually at 2014 before it was started, and I said that it fails all 4. And it is being that we did not have all the parameters, but as more the parameters come out, it becomes more and more evident that that is the case. So let's start with financial. Right. This was sold as a commercially viable project. I said at the time, doing very quick back-of-the-envelope calculations, that for this project to pay its debts, it would need to run more than 50 trains a day, which of course you cannot do on a single track railway. I have looked at it in the last couple of days, following the kind of reportage that is going on, and those numbers still stand. As it happens, there was a study done by Kipra last year, which revealed that contrary to what we were told, that the railway has a capacity for 22 million tons, the actual installed capacity in terms of rolling stock, the trains, is only 8 million tons. Wow. Okay? Now, 8 million tons, and it can only run 8 trains a day. That cannot even service its debt. So it is not a commercially viable project. As I wrote in 2014, it was already evident that the loans would be paid by the taxpayer, and that remains the case.
Yeah. So when the government, because they're on record saying that by the end of this year, by December, the project will break even. In fact, the Deputy President saying that by 2020, when the loan repayment should begin, it will not be coming from the exchequer, that SGR will pay for itself. Does that add up?
Let's be clear. the loan repayments, interest on the debt started on day one. The way loans are structured, you can get grace period on the principal, but you pay interest. So we've been paying interest since 2014.
Right.
What is kicking in now, because you understand the loans have 5-year grace, is the principal. And that is kicking in this year. From the media reports we have seen, that is in the order of the two, interest and principal, is in the order of 50 billion shillings a year. The study done by Kipra showed that the maximum revenue that it can make 5 years from now, based on very heroic assumptions, is 50 billion. So even before you have run its costs, because if you're making 50 billion revenue, and you've got costs, the maximum you can probably pay to pay your debt is 10 billion. So there is no time, actually, that it will be able to pay its debt. In fact, the study says quite clearly that for it to be able to make to meet the 22 million tons target, which was the construction target, you have to ramp up its capacity 3 times from what it is today.
Yeah.
Now, ramping that capacity up 3 times means spending a whole lot more money, means a lot more debt. Okay? So there was no time it was meant to break even on year one. And no project of this scale can break down on year one. So what you
are they being dishonest to Kenyans blatantly?
They're being completely dishonest, but they always were. The Jubilee lies through their teeth. They lie about many things. They lie about roads. They lie about all sorts of development projects. So, and this is one where they've been caught out, in a project that was not viable, and they're now trying to sort of cover. They're just being flippant because they don't want to answer the questions.
So when you talk about expansion, does that compound an already dire situation in your view, or does it alleviate where we find ourselves as a country with this infrastructural program?
Listen, the railway has a capacity of 8 million tons of cargo.
Right.
Now, 8 million tons of cargo is already what our transit cargo is to the hinterland countries, okay, Uganda and Tanzania, Uganda and Congo and beyond. What that tells you is that you cannot carry domestic and transit cargo at the same time, okay? If you make it, if you expand it and it goes into Uganda and onwards, it will only carry transit cargo from Mombasa. So inland cargo, Nairobi, Mombasa cargo, Mombasa, Nairobi cargo will be either back on the road or you have to upgrade the old railway, but it cannot do both. Yeah. So once you expand it, once you extend it to the hinterland, you take it out of our local equation. Then the question you have to ask, why should we spend 800, almost 1 trillion shillings to build a railway for Uganda? Because it will only be carrying cargo for Uganda and DRC. Right. So, and then if it cannot carry both domestic and transit cargo, why extend it? Yeah? So that the extension argument is, the other thing is that we actually do not have the borrowing capacity. You have had now, as I've said for a long time, that our debt ladder has run out of rungs. We actually don't have the headroom to borrow that kind of money anymore. So it's even a moot point whether we can actually finance its expansion.
Correct. You've seen the reports in the regarding how the service is running, the trains, the claims of racism, reports of racism and discrimination, that some of the programs in the trains are still in Chinese, that the Chinese are favored more even in as far as driving these trains. What does all of this also point to in your view?
This was a bad project from day one. It was supply-driven. China. The feasibility study was done by the Chinese, by the contractor. The contractor does a feasibility study for you. He raises the finances, he builds the thing, and then you give it to them to run. Okay, so there are no governance structures that have been put in for this project. I think the new information to the public, which is not new to people who've been following this, was that we are paying 1 billion shillings a month for the Chinese to manage it.
Yeah.
So we borrowed from them. So we are servicing the debt. We have already paid them about 80 billion shillings in interest since 2014. So if you look at what we've done, these are export promotion projects for China. China is exporting things. It's exporting steel, it's exporting trains. So China lent us money through their Exim Bank. These are export-import sort of financing banks. So China is promoting its trade. We are then paying an interest on that. We are now paying them to maintain the thing. We are buying spare parts from them. So basically, this is a project entirely to benefit China at our expense. It's not peculiar to us. It's happening all over this part of the world, the Indian Ocean and Pacific, based on Chinese sort of whatever global ambitions. If you look at the countries which are now in trouble with similar projects, started with Sri Lanka, with its port and airport, which has now been taken over by the Chinese for military purposes. Djibouti is in the same situation. Pakistan is in the same situation. So we are pawns.
Wow.
We are pawns in a China power sort of global dominance sort of strategy.
Finally, in your view, what happens from here? Will we get to a point where this blows up, goes bust for the poor project you have said from the beginning it was, or are there steps and changes that can be made to make sure it works and Kenyans do not continue feeling the pinch?
The problem is now financial, okay? So there's no way other than some refinancing, which I don't know of what kind, we remove the burden from the taxpayer.
Right.
I did a sort of simple calculation the other day when they said that they don't carry 30,000 containers in 6 months, which means that they're going to carry only 60,000 containers in a year. And based on that, and you look at what the taxpayer is paying, that works out to the fact that we are subsidizing each container as a public. The owner, the commercial owner of the goods is paying 40,000 shillings, and the public is paying 1.3 million shillings per container. Obviously, that will go down if it carries its sort of capacity.
Yeah.
But even if you get that up to 200,000 containers, which is unlikely, the taxpayer is still going to subsidizing it to the tune of subsidizing the owners of the cargo to the tune of 200,000 or more per container. So the question you want to ask, should money that should have paid for education and healthcare and other infrastructure, for instance, rural access roads and small irrigation projects and all the other things that we actually need to create jobs and grow the economy, should and reduce poverty, should that money be spent to subsidize industrialists in terms of freight?
Right.
I think that's a fundamental development question. So when I say it fails on the economic, I already explained how it fails financially. On the economy, it fails on that count, that money, the opportunity cost of that money that we are using to subsidize freight, which people are paying for themselves before on the road, is that this money is not available to do more high return development projects. Then if you look at the social, there's a very big social issue which has not featured. The port of Mombasa is there because Mombasa has a natural harbor. Now the harbor is a natural resource of the people of Mombasa. Now what we're doing is creating a public monopoly. You know, people are being coerced to put their cargo on the SGR. So we are moving the port inland. So the harbor is in Mombasa. That's a natural waterway that ships use. But the people of Mombasa will no longer benefit from it because all the port logistics will now be moved inland. Initially to the ICD in Nairobi, but we also hear that it may be moved to Naivasha. I don't know why. So that's a huge, so you're moving jobs and the economy of Mombasa, which is in many ways a marginalized region in some respects, You're moving it from poorer Mombasa to wealthy Nairobi. So you're moving the dock workers' jobs from Mombasa to Nairobi. Will these people be able to follow their jobs? I don't think so. I think that's potentially a very politically explosive issue.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. David Ndii, economist. Yusuf, back to you.
Thank you very much, Sophia, for that. Of course, I'm sure Kenyans have watched everything about that analysis. Of course, taxpayers have to put away with 30 million Kenyan shillings a day, 1 billion Kenyan shilling a month to run the SGR. But let's address the elephant in the room tonight, and that is why we have this discussion following that shocking report by the Standard on Sunday, where Kenyan workers are being forced to cope with racism, poor pay, and torture. Yes, you heard me right. Torture in the hands of their Chinese masters. Let's now take a look at the investment of Kenya's biggest infrastructure project that is now turning into an anguish, for Kenyans. We're going to get those infographics for you shortly on the screen. There you go. The total amount is there, 448.9 billion to be spent on SGR by end of this financial year. And 500 billion shillings, those are other costs incurred before 2015, equivalent to KRA annual tax collection. And then 1 billion Kenyan shillings, as I've already said, paid to CRBC to run the SGR per month. That translates to 30 million Kenyan shillings per day. And then 3.5 billion Kenyan shillings is the amount that is free interest advance payment to CRBC that is meant for mobilization, procurement, and cash flow support. And then over to the issue that we've been talking about, pay disparities between Kenyan and Chinese workers. Some Kenyan workers have been fired, more Chinese to replace Kenyan staff. And then, of course, there's poor working condition at the SGR. Kenyan drivers have been sidelined, workers earning less than what is reported at KRA, quote-unquote, unwritten racist rules. Of course, we're going to go into detail of that shocking report coming out of SGR. But earlier, I spoke to two SGR employees on phone on condition of anonymity, and they narrated some harrowing tales in relation to their working environment. We have altered their voices to conceal their identity. Let's listen in.
But when it comes to technology transfer, there are issues because you find our drivers have not been able to drive the train since they began training in April 2016. Well, when the president was taken on a ride, it was only a show where it was seen two ladies driving him, but that was a PR. Because they only moved 100 meters, then the Chinese took over. So as far as we are concerned, even to date, there's been no Kenyan train driver who has taken the wheel.
So how many Kenyan drivers are there at the moment? And I understand that some of you have been fired and then you've been replaced by not Kenyan locomotive drivers, but Chinese drivers. Is it true?
Yeah. The Chinese drivers, the Kenyan drivers just sit there and watch.
Have they made any explanation with regards to that?
No, they don't. You know, this is an organization where you don't question. And in most cases, when you question, you are fired. Yeah. So like, they are trying to conceal so much. Like, there's a time a train stalled at Kiboys on the way to Nairobi. I don't know whether you are aware about that, a passenger train.
Yes.
And then our freight train locomotive came to pull it out, but when it pulled height out and was taken to Nairobi, the engine was supposed to be done an overhaul. Then our Kenyan technicians there were not allowed. After the guys were told to go off duty, then when they came back, they found that the Chinese had repaired the engine. This, to our understanding, was meant to mean that our guys should not get the knowledge.
What kind of punishment do you undergo whenever you disagree with the Chinese workers?
It depends on the Chinese. Some will give you, like, you can do press-ups, you can lie on the ground, such things. Others will tell you, go off, and then the day is not paid for. So it depends on the supervisor. But a punishment has to be done. That is an assurance.
And this is happening in Kenya?
this is happening in Kenya.
Have you reported this, or have your colleagues reported this to any relevant authority there, and have they acted perhaps?
It was raised with the Kenya Railways, and at one point, this question was sent directly to the MD, Atanas Maina. But what he said is that if we felt that wherever we came from was better, then we should be there, not at the SGR. So we were wondering who is there to defend the Kenyans.
How many of your colleagues have been fired so far? Can you have a rough picture?
I think we have about 20 guys who have been fired so far.
Yeah.
Please, can you just maybe talk us through about the pay? Because I understand that you do similar jobs with your colleagues from China, but at the same time you're paid less compared to them. How true is that?
Yeah, that's true. Because a Kenyan would get, let's say, like around 40,000, whereby the Chinese getting 180,000. But when the Kenyan is getting the 30,000, he has to pay rent. He has to use transport. But on the other hand, the Chinese is given accommodation, is given food, is given transport, his clothes are washed. So if you work overnight, then you have to go home in the morning, no transport. Then you are so tired, you have to go and prepare your food. You have to get your transport. But on the opposite, this guy just walks to the house, his food is prepared, and his clothes are washed by somebody. So you see, there is discrimination. They are better treated than us Kenyans.
So the SGR aside, that is the shocking report I've been talking about earlier. And of course, just a recap of what those workers at the SGR talked to them earlier. And this is what they're saying. The Kenyans are not allowed to use cafeteria or to use Chinese tables in the cafeteria. They're not even allowed to share vans with their Chinese counterpart. And apparently at the moment, there are about 40 trained locomotive drivers from Kenya. But up to now, their job is just to sit in the cabin. They're not allowed to drive. And I've talked to another SGR staff. Let's listen to what he had to say.
In fact, wao smoke, unajua wao smoke.
Ndio.
Sasa unajua hiyo kama umeingia kwa train uone ama picha. Nika room tu hivi eh.
Ndio.
As in hiyo mtena akismoke. Atafungua dirisha. Sasa hiyo smoke tu iko hapo, na unajua akwangi mmoja, anakwanga main driver ni mmoja hivi, alafu anafunza wachena wenzake wawili. Sasa wewe utakaa hapo, wewe ufunze, wewe kazi yako ukae, ufike Mombasa, washe train, kesho hivyo.
And you're a driver. You're supposed to drive.
Yeah, you're a driver. Yeah, your work is just to sit, watch, because even HR Wang, alituambia, you Kenyans, I don't see why I pay you a lot of money, because your work is just to sit and look. I have nothing to pay you, because pesa na walipa ambaye kulipwa na hii kazi yenu haiko hapa, ni kuangalia tu mbele, ni joyriding, badala alisema joyriding, tuko joyriding. So what I mean is, huyo mtena akismoke, uvae kuuliza. So now ukiuliza, that's another issue. So unakaa tu unaumia tu peke yako.
Can you perhaps tell us some of the punishment that Kenyan workers undergo in the hands of their counterparts from China?
Okay. Punishment ziko hivi. I mean, if you question our Chinese something like hours, because hours zenye wao tulipa ni hours kidogo. So ukiingia job kama leo tuseme,
Yes.
Ulale tuseme unavaa kuamka kisha asubuhi enda na train. Utawahi uliza kwa nini unalala. You have to sleep, uamke kesha asubuhi. So when you try to ask your hours, zilienda wapi, nilikuja kazi nikareport, ni aje inakuwa sina hiyo masaa. Anakuthreaten with the warning letters. So what you do, make sure wale watu huo ongea sana, hawa ndio anazima kwanza. Anakupea warning letter, na anakuweka bila gari, yani utaipata masaa mingi ushinde wengine, you know. Yani frustration anakuonyesha ni zile azini usikue comfortable, na ana make sure trades zake amekupea kabisa ndio usipate chance hata ya kupumua.
Ebu utuambie, wakati mnatumia van, when you're using their van, apparently you're not supposed to share the van with any worker from China?
You can't. Hata akiwa mmoja ndani huwezi. Hata huyo dereva hawezi simamisha. Huyo Kenyan driver, unajua wanakuwa Kenyan drivers, So hawezi simama. Hata already hata yeye anajua mtena kibeba mtena hapa, hata niona Wakenya wakinyeshewa pale hawezi beba. Juu hata hakuna haja, juu atasimamisha mkiingia mfukuzo. Hakuna. Na unajua saa wao wanaweza tumia van waende kulala kwa apartment ama lunch, unaona? Si mambo na job. But wewe unaenda job, huwezi pewa hiyo fan.
I think you've had the harrowing experience of some of the SGR staff there. That is, for lack of a better word, utmost racism. You've heard that the moment that Kenyan locomotive drivers have been outnumbered by those from China, with 50 of them from China compared to just 38 drivers, local drivers. So the question is, are these individuals even being vetted? Because they're basically doing the job the Kenyans can do. And we've tried to reach the Kenya Railway Managing Director, Atnas Maina, by way of phone. We couldn't reach him. But I'm going to speak to Moses Kuria, who is the Deputy Chair of the National Assembly Transport Committee, shortly. And of course, we'll continue with the discussion right in studio. Of course, you're watching the big story right on KTN News. We're going to take a very short break, but we'll be right back with the very latest coming out of the SGR. I'll tell you. Stay with